In any gacha game, tier lists are a staple. Who's the best, who's the worst, and which characters should you feel bad about if you decide to build them? They have their uses in letting you know how to best direct your limited resources. But with Star Rail, I personally feel that a lot of the characters are pretty well balanced, and each feels pretty fun to play, especially with some of the randomized endgame we have, such as the simulated universe. Sampo is one of those characters that is currently rated pretty low in the community tier list. He is by no means bad, but as far as the tier list is concerned, you have other priorities you should be focusing on, which I agree. You should work on establishing a strong first and second team, then do whatever you want. That being said, I have spent a bit of time building him and putting resources into him, so I wanted to share with you what I think he's good at, so that if you feel like building him yourself, you would have a better idea of what you could get out of him. So in this video, let's talk about whether Sampo is worth building and what can he bring to your team if you decide to do so. Before we get into that, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's start off with an overview of his kit. Sampo is a wind element nihility character. The nihility path is not only reserved for debuffers, but also for characters who deal damage primarily from damage over time effects. Sampo falls under the latter part of that group, and through his kit can apply a large amount of wind shear DOT. If you're not too familiar with DOTs, they're basically a debuff applied on the target that causes them to take damage at the start of their turn. Sampo's skill has him basically throw a knife that hits a single target and then bounces to other enemies for a total of 5 hits. The hits can land on different enemies, or it can hit the same enemy once or twice back to back depending on RNG. If there is only one target, all 5 hits will land on that single target. It's sort of similar to Asta's ability. His ultimate deals wind damage to all enemies based on a percentage of his attack and has a 100% chance to apply a debuff that increases damage taken from dot effects for 2 turns. The ultimate also hits each enemy multiple times. Now his talent is where his wind shear application comes into play. All of Sampo's attacks, whether it's his basic, skill, or ultimate, has a 65% base chance to apply wind shear for 3 turns. The wind shear can stack up to 5 times, and since most of his attacks have multiple hits, stacking the dot to its maximum stack is really not that difficult. On top of that, all elemental attacks have a chance to apply dots naturally when they break the enemy weakness, and so Sampo can stack these debuffs really fast, especially if there is only one enemy on the field. So long story short, everything he does applies wind shear and increases the damage enemies take from dots in general. Now that you understand his abilities, what roles are suitable for this character? Well, in my personal testing, and I use that word very loosely because there's no math or anything here, I feel that he's useful for 2 main purposes. The first is that Sampo is a great wind elemental breaker. Because he hits multiple times with basically all of his attacks, much like Asta, if he focuses on one enemy, he can break through their weakness bar incredibly fast. In some of the harder fights against enemies weak to wind, I find he functions pretty well as a super fast wind elemental breaker. Now there are other wind elemental characters in game such as Danheng and Bronya, but their attacks are lower in frequency, and so if you need a fast breaker, Sampo is a lot better at this specific job due to his multi-hit kit. The other use that I noticed for him is if you want to focus on doing damage primarily through damage over time. In terms of wind shear, he is by far the most reliable applicator, as getting 5 stacks is incredibly easy. There are other element characters who can apply dots like Serval and Hook, but for wind, Sampo is likely the most reliable one we have right now. Now DOT in itself is not to say a bad source of damage, but it really can't compare with some of the single target nukers we have right now like Sealer, Jingyuan, Yanqing, and even Sushang. The meta for now is mostly focused on a hyper carry team comp with a bunch of buffers and support to really push the damage potential of that particular carry. If you compare Sampo to those types of teams, then you can sort of guess why he's rated pretty low. There is, however, one place where he feels super satisfying to use, and that's in the simulated universe. Now I know that in the simulated universe, most characters can be built into disgusting damage dealers given the right blessings, but just hear me out. If you go down the Nihility tree, which buffs the damage that dots do overall, and even has modifiers that allow them to tick for damage more than once, damage over time team comms become really nice to play. I'm sure some of you have seen examples of this, especially when people showcase Sampo in the Kafka fight. I've been having a lot of fun using both Serval and Sampo, as well as the light cone that burns enemies on the Fire MC, stacking as much dot as I can and watching enemies explode from the damage. So just purely for fun, Sampo is pretty good in Simulated Universe, given he can stack Windshear so consistently. Before I end this video, there is one last thing I'd like to add, but it will involve some spoilers, so if you're not interested in knowing which characters will appear beyond 1.1, you can skip to the end. One of the playable characters in the future will be Kafka. Kafka is also a Nihility character who relies on doing damage through shock dots, but one thing that's built into her kit is similar to what makes dots good in Simulated Universe. Basically, her skill allows her to trigger every dot effect on the targeted enemy and cause all those dots to deal damage at the same time alongside her skill. Obviously, this becomes very powerful and Sampo will become a great character to partner Kafka up with. Now, of course, you shouldn't be building one character specifically to support just Kafka, but I just wanted to let you know that kits like this may appear in the future, making dot teams more viable. But that's basically all I have to say about Sampo. To answer the question of the video, I don't think you absolutely need to build him right now unless you need a reliable wind elemental weakness breaker or would like to have some fun with dots in the Simulated Universe. In every other content, he performs generally well, but if you have some of the better DPS, they will probably outperform him for now. I'd say he is overall good, but not as great as other higher tiered characters, but perhaps this will change in the future. I'll end the video here, and if you found this video helpful, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.